Good evening. Um, well, I used to see Bearden on the street in Lower Manhattan when I first moved to New York, but I was not sophisticated enough to talk with him. I knew he was a nice guy, and I also knew that he was highly regarded. And he he would invite me to the studio almost every time I saw him, but some kind of way I was always involved doing something. Probably something dumb, but it doesn't matter now. But I think that he was very close to two guys who were very influential on me, other writers. One was Albert Murray, and the other was Ralph Ellison. And I've been reading a lot about Bearden from them in the last few days in order to get ready to come up here and stand up here and face you guys. So the thing is that what I really think is most important about Bearden is that he took on his version of what I think was Pablo Picasso's greatest achievement, which is what in music a guy named Lenny Tristano used to refer to as freeing the line. And so now all visual art in two dimensions is based on lines. Now, the line, as we know in geometry, is supposed to have no beginning and no ending. But what an artist does is by the manipulation of the line, the artist creates the reality for you, the viewer, by expressing himself or herself, as they say. Now, Bearden was highly influenced by Picasso on the one hand, but he also did something that was very remarkable, which was that Flaubert, in a book called The Unknown Masterpiece, talks about a painting, and this guy says, well, this man obviously has studied the figure, but his figure doesn't look like it looks like it's been pasted onto the canvas. It doesn't look like it's part of the surroundings, nor do the surroundings actually look like they're behind the figure. Now, what great painters do is they paint in a way that makes you think that you know there's a back. That whenever you see the front of any character or figure, you think you see their back in some way. And it's because they have that they can create that sense of reality that you get in a photograph where you say, well, if this is the front of John Wayne, there must be a back on him. So now the thing is, Bearden did what he did in a way that really reminds me very much of Louis Armstrong, because Armstrong had an extraordinary daring and a great sense of humor and an extraordinary compassion, so that the emotional epic of experience that he understood, having grown up very poor in New Orleans, come to Chicago, then come to New York, and got bigger and bigger in music in every place. Bearden was born in North Carolina, came up to two cities, and ended up, of course, in New York. Now, when he was growing up in New York, New York was uptown was well, it was poor, but it was also vital. And he and Armstrong were very aware of the vitality of the community that they knew. And so when Armstrong played music or when Bearden created images, he was trying to create images that had the same vitality of the people whom he knew. Now, the first thing, of course, is that if you're a modern artist, and you're interested in many classical painters, for instance, like Bruegel, then the first thing was, see, because Bruegel did one thing over and over, not always on a gigantic scale. He made you forget that this is only a split second, that you're not looking at something that's taking place over a long period of time. You're looking at something that goes like, just like that. So with Bearden, when he began to go into collage, he was able to use photographs. And one of the things that the camera can do, because there are a lot of things that the camera cannot do, but the camera does one thing very well. It gets an image in a split second. And it makes you realize, after you look at enough photographs, that's what these great painters in the past could do. So if you look at Caravaggio, any great painter in the past, Rembrandt, they're painting something that's taking place in a split second, but they have developed their eyes so they can see it. And there are things that actual painters paint that are things that you only see in a half second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and it's gone. But they don't forget it. And they get to a canvas and they look around until they can reproduce what they saw. Now, in Bearden's world, he also realized that the point finally is, when you think in an epic sense, or you think about life itself, then you're dealing with, and something that comes up in his work over and over, you're dealing with a collection of perspectives. See, because life is always a collective endeavor. There are a lot of people doing it and a lot of things doing it. That's what makes it life, the power of the collection. But the power of the collection also means the power of perspective. And that was what he really, when he got to his stuff, and when he was ready, he could deal on that level. So that I think that his ability to summon all these moods that Louis Armstrong learned to summon when he was playing music in New Orleans, from the funeral to the wedding to the christening to the frivolity, whatever it was, he could play that whole range, or he was used to that whole range. And I think that is what makes Bearden an important artist, is because he took on the problems of dealing with polyrhythmic perspectives, and he also maintained a connection to the vitality of the life that he grew up in. Because finally, every form of life anywhere is not literally the same, but the primary experiences that people have are understood universally. And that's why Bearden's work like Armstrong's music, as they used to say about certain kinds of wines, it travels well. Thank you very much.
Good evening. It's very nice to hear something coming back. It's very good, lovely. My name is Kwame Dawes. It's good to be here. It's quite an honor to be here, to be invited to be a part of this. I blame it on a sort of feisty encounter with Russell Goins some months ago. There's no other kind, really, with Russ. But also because he's shown me great generosity and kindness and spirit. I'm going to do what I do, which is I read poems, and hopefully they will speak to some of the things that we are going to be talking about tonight. I'm reading a poem called The Wholeness, and it is drawn from the two interesting intersections of African American art. August Wilson's fantastic 10-play sequence, the 20th century sequence, and of course Romare Bearden's art. And Wilson himself spoke so much about the influence and the power and impact that art had on his work. So these poems are engaged with the art, are engaged with the play by August Wilson, the plays by August Wilson, so I'll just share them with you. But I have two sort of small epigraphs for you, both from August Wilson. The first, August Wilson says, "This art of Romare Bearden was the art of a large and generous spirit that defined not only the character of Black American life, but also its conscience. I was looking at myself in ways I hadn't thought of before and have never ceased to think of since. What I saw was Black life presented on its own terms, on a grand and epic scale, with all its richness and fullness in a language that was vibrant and which made attendant to everyday life, ennobled it, affirmed its value, and exalted its presence." That's August Wilson speaking of Romare Bearden. The image that you see up there, of course, is the piano lesson, and these poems are in dialogue with that piece. 1, avoiding the spirits. Bernice says, "I don't play that piano because I don't want to wake them spirits. They never be walking around this house." When at sunset the congregation gathers in the low light of St. Helena's old gray Baptist chapel, they guard their hearts from the whisper of the low-bellied trees, calling on the blood as they brush off the dew on their coats by the burial ground. When they sing, the sound has the flat simplicity of prayer, a sound that brings heat to your neck, tears to your eyes, because you can hear in the rugged rafters hewn from old-growth trees at the water's edge the voices of all those people who had nothing but lament and Jesus to fill the gap of a stolen life. The sisters can't make a man cross that threshold unless he has come to lay someone to rest or to witness a child's blessing or a daughter's wedding, for a man can't hear the flat voices in the church and not feel the droop of his shoulders and the weight of his dangling, empty hands that have too often hung helpless for prudence sake, for good sense, making him not a man, but an empty shell. A creature who laughs to stop the shame of not being able to keep his family together and safe. No, he will rather sit in the dark cathedral of the juke joint and let the blues of sardonic regret and caustic distance wash him, make him know that he is alone on the road and all he's got is his story. My people long gave up on the ancestors when they learned that those stepping out of the woods are the crippled gods, the beaten gods, the blackened and burnt out, tongueless gods, the broken gods, the castrated gods, the shadow gods with questions, asking us if they will ever heal, asking for a brain from the living. Who wants to pour libation for the burdened spirits? Silence is our salvation. That and the reassurance of this earth, this clear air, this forgetting. 2, to tame the savage beast. You learn the chemistry of linseed, the softening of beeswax, the muscles you grow in your forearm make you able to break the tiny bones in a white child's hands. You have thought of this. You watch her float along the blackened boards, her feet bruised red with fever as she settles at the piano, her white bundle of fabric swelling about her. She looks at you to see if you have paused to hear, and as always she mutters, "I'm taming the heart of the beast." She looks at you with a soft smile like she does to her cats or the idiot dog she feeds to bloated grogginess. You look back, smile a smile of stones before she begins to play. All these years, you've heard the sound as the anthem of blood, broken glass, smashed wood, clicking bones sliced by a heavy cutlass. The choking squeal of breathlessness, the grunt before silence. All these years, your eyes have rested on the faces of your blood, carved by your father's steady hand into the piano. Soft wood, this crowd of holy witnesses she relishes, pitifully spoiled bitch who just wanted to keep her brown-faced Negroes around her. You come closer, place your hands on the embossment of bodies, a shape you have caressed tenderly for years, a shape you whisper to at night, a shape that, come the grand finale, walks out of the woods, stands sentinel around the piano and this white woman, and issues a riot of laughter and shame over her. You will soon slip away, knowing that it is not yet time, your arms twitching, your fists made and unmade. And 3, the lesson. Fingers can be trained to make shapes that pressed just right on the gleaming keys will make a sound that can stay tears or cause them to flow for days. Anyone can learn to make some music, but not all have the heart to beat out the tunes that will turn us inside out. Knowing how to play this thing is a gift and a curse. Left alone in the bone, all our demons will come and occupy the dry, warm places we have left wide open for the cultivators of despair and discord to fill. The silence is not a voice, but an absence as weighty as the heavy air in fog. Everything, the new century man says, has a price. The art is in the alchemy of turning trash to cash. It is a longing that will make us give what we have to hear, a sound that would wash us with the sweet, hollow feeling that comes after tears. Somebody will pay for this every time. This is another lesson. That woman's barrenness is a dress she wears each morning. Her body still remembers the supple swoop of her thighs moving to desire, but this dress will dry out even the pliant gift of music she has made for years. She is beaten back laughter with lament and anger, and the drought devours the open field. Things carry the blood and bone of their makers. A careful listener will hear the sigh and grunt of labor. In the gleaming wood of the piano, those faces, those bodies are etched into the face of the cherry wood, and the music knocking its way out through the pores of the skin. Left silent, a dryness takes hold, a dull, crumbling rot sets in. But the ghosts make deals with the air. After a while, an unwelcome room will empty of the unwelcome. Remember this always. A full woman, straight-backed, playing the piano with her breath held so deep in her, it moves her hips. And when her voice fills the room, the unwelcome flees just like that. Thank you.
Good evening. It's such an honor to be here tonight, but I could not begin my brief remarks without first thanking Russell Goings, Bob Gilson, Bernard Schwartz, the director of the Untenberg Poetry Center, and for giving me the honor of speaking with such a distinguished panel and distinguished audience members, two of which include my parents, Ted and Diane Lewis, who first introduced me to Bearden's work. I'd like to begin, though, by thinking about one man who anticipated and celebrated Bearden long before he arrived. Frederick Douglass, the most photographed American man in the 19th century, the volcanic orator who spent years delivering, redrafting, and reshaping speeches, thought about the critical role of what some might consider just mere trifles in the face of a nation-severing conflict. In 1861 and again in 1865, Douglass gave a lecture about the Civil War in which he argued that combat might end complete sectional disunion, but America's progress would require an encounter with something unexpected. Pictures, he said, and the thought pictures they might conjure in one's imagination. Long before the Black Arts Movement, before the New Negro Movement, Douglass fervently made the case in this speech entitled Pictures and Progress that, quote, the key to the great mystery of life and progress was the ability of men and women to fashion a mental or material picture and let his or her entire world, feelings, and vision of every other living thing be affected by it. The human capacity for artful, imaginative thought is what permits us to accurately see life in all of its layers. All that is really peculiar to humanity, he would state, proceeds from this one great faculty or power. He went on to describe the whole soul of man when rightfully viewed as a sort of picture gallery, a grand panorama. And it's this contrast of images and thought pictures in our mind that allows for the forward thrust and vision of society to become manifest. It was a modernist vision of the world that might take decades, if not a century or so, to become clear. The power of Bearden's work must have been, I believe, what he had in mind. Bearden's vision was to show us this contrast and eradicate it pictorially. He gathered photographs, slashed them into textures and colors with a proto-cubist modernist technique, and then sutured them together, guided by improvisation, to create what Kobena Mercer has called an integrative modernism, what I might call an ecumenical modernism that allowed him to absorb, honor, and let often seemingly separate cultures coexist on the pictorial plane, just as they do in life. Bearden's meaning is identical with his method, Ralph Ellison said. If Walt Whitman could collapse the world with words, Bearden would collapse the world with form. He was the first 20th century artist to pull from Dada photomontage as much as Cubist traditions as he did from Kikongo, Mande, and other African forms with off-beat phrasing. As we see here in Mother and Child, the culturally polyglot forms, when enlarged in this proto-Cubist style to include African diasporic contexts, offer a send-up, a rejoinder to modern primitivism that suggested African forms as a kind of contemporary ancestor to modernity. Bearden declaimed what Robert Farris Thompson once beautifully stated: "Until you know how African you are, you will never know how American you are." Bearden started with what he knew, distilling the African-American experience, the details of daily, ritual, rhythmic, and romantic life, and universalized it, so that we see it as we see Michelangelo as Italian, but applicable to all, and speaking for the human family. In Of the Blues Showtime from 1974, we see a scene inspired by the vitality of the music and life in Harlem that Stanley Crouch described. And here he put the blues idiom on display on the canvas, approaching his work as a jazz musician might, with enough technique to play anything, with the blues as the rule and improv as the method, resulting in a soul-stated piece in the language of form. But here we show a possible conversation with Degas' Café Singer from 1879. He was constantly engaging with these prior techniques as he was looking at daily Black life. Here we see Richard Catton Woodville's card players and Paul Cézanne's card players as well as a riff that Bearden was engaging with. For he knew that to engage with Black culture was to engage with the world. He put it this way to Dory Ashton in 1964. As a Negro, I do not need to go looking for happenings, the absurd, or the surreal, because I have seen things that neither Dali, Beckett, or Ionesco, or any of the others could have thought possible. So when he read the Homeric epic, he saw Harlem in the Odyssey, and Odysseus in Harlem, as Bob O'Meally eloquently writes. He found a blues-like heroism in his figures throughout, as we see here in the collage, Odysseus Leaves Searcy from his 1977 series, many of the watercolors of which are on display tonight. At the time, he was referencing the ongoing debate about the Afro-Asiatic roots in Greco-Roman culture, but he turned the seemingly separate cultural forms into lines of common connection. He said at a symposium at the Metropolitan Museum in 1969, Black culture is involved far more into the whole cultural fabric of American life than we realize, but it's up to us to find out the contribution that we have made to the whole cultural fabric of American life. No one is going to do it for us. He took it upon himself to live out his own word, editing seminal catalogs in African American art, some of them published posthumously. They're exemplified by this scrolling maquette that we see here, a symbolic pageant of African American history that has a tunneling encyclopedic focus on Black heritage across time. Bearden's work is so well known that it's hard to imagine coming upon this piece, which was only came to light a few years ago, for what remains an unknown project. Central to this four-panel collage is the image of Martin Luther King, the only one that appears unmanipulated, save for 3 black paint marks, one following the thickening line of his eyebrow and the other 2 just under his shirt collar, transforming the figure into a historical bust. Conceived 4 years after King's death, it was done in the wake of what I might call King's aesthetic funerals. The urge we saw after his death to visually unfurl, spread, and scroll images, ideas, and epic visions of African American culture as if to secure a horizon line that seemed suddenly in doubt. For some, this spread became an act of memento mori, as we see here lovingly done by the artist Kerry James Marshall, where he took his personal archive of related signs, photographs, and postcards to create a piece done in 1998. We see it again in the photograph that Benedict Fernandez took on April 5th, 1968, of 3 men with their torsos covered in buttons of King's Poor People's Campaign. Wearing them might have signaled an alignment, an association with the movement, but to wear 15, 14, and 17 buttons on your arms and torso, covering even your jacket zippers, such that the image reads as more important than anything else, was to almost lay out the body of King. But in Bearden's hands, his own aesthetic unfurling with this blues improvisational style had the tone of a New Orleans funeral parade. Here, King has first laid to rest the body of the leader, but goes on to celebrate African diasporic culture and African American as well. He had been looking at the world as the grand panorama that Douglas described. Bearden formed the group Spiral in 1963 for African American artists engaging with the civil rights movement, and had moved from abstraction to figurative painting by this time. The name of the group, Spiral, the Archimedean spiral with the curving line that moves outwards and upwards, exemplifies Bearden's trajectory itself. When I was curating at the Museum of Modern Art, I found out that James Sobey, who was then the director of the Armed Services Program at MoMA, there was such a thing in the 1940s, aimed to support democracy through the arts, felt moved to write about Sergeant Bearden one day when he was serving in the Army, petitioning that in his leisure time that he'd be allowed to create murals for Americans Bearden wasn't interested in making murals at that time, but I mention this because even before he did so, there was a sense of his epic vision and what would come. Poets, prophets, and reformers are all picture makers, and this is the secret of their power and their achievements, Frederick Douglass concluded, about the importance we all might find in the pictures that Bearden fashioned on American soil. They see what ought to be by the reflection of what is and endeavor to remove the contradiction. It was a statement that anticipated Bearden's sweeping arc, his inexhaustible legacy of work on the world stage, and why to speak about Bearden is to speak about the lineage he created for all of us. We hear it from playwright August Wilson, who first encountered the prevalence of ritual in 1977. He said, quote, "I tried to make my plays the equal of his canvases," and described that he worked essentially in collage. We see Bearden's 6-paneled, 18-foot-long collage of the block in Harlem, of which this is one alternate version, in Kira Lynn Harris's piece, The Block, Bologna, created this year, to honor his structural compositions, not only his color, as she said, as part of the Studio Museum in Harlem's recent initiative called the Bearden Project, asking artists to make works in response to him. It doesn't take an initiative for many artists to do so. Micheline Thomas created a recent commission for the Barclay Center that engaged with Bearden organically, and we see it through Heather Hart's piece, Hermes on the Rooftop, giving a brown face to the messenger God himself here, how Bearden's generative work seeds in others a desire to find their own transformative visual language for the world. I mentioned my parents earlier as introducing me to Bearden, and I will say in conclusion, they did so by putting a work on the wall when I was around 3 years old in our living room, the only work in our living room that was not a photograph of one of our ancestors or relatives. That work stayed up in our home until I was 18, not because they wanted to replace it with that of another renowned artist. I think in overzealous parental pride, they wanted to replace it with my own work, which I'm too embarrassed to show you and will not put on the projector. But I mention it because as I was preparing to come here today, I think I now understand why my work was the only thing they could put up instead. Bearden does put all of us, I believe, in lineage. In collapsing the world down into his own idiom, he inspires us to find a way to transform what we see and do the same. Thank you so much.
Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be here today, and it's wonderful to be in such extraordinary backstage company as well. And it's also wonderful to feel here in the images that are hanging outside, in the images that are shown on the screen, the very presence of Bearden. The way that Bearden's work helps us feel and understand, as does the work of all great artists, that every shut-eye ain't asleep and every goodbye ain't gone, which is to say that when we behold the artist's work, we stand inside of them and look out at the world and see the world the way that they saw it. And that is tantamount to presence, a powerful presence that is with us tonight and is with us whenever we are able to spend time with this art, spend time with what the artist has given us. Following on Sarah Lewis's presentation, I wanted to talk a little bit about the way that the Bearden collage as method, as process, as epistemology, as Rosetta Stone, is a way of thinking about creativity and the creative process, not just with what visual artists make, but also with what Black artists and artists make in varied genres. The Bearden collage, I think, is a powerful enactment and metaphor for art making in the African diaspora, fragmentation and reassemblage in the new space, the present image bearing traces of what it has come from, bearing its histories, but refigured and energized and alchemized as something new in the forward-moving present. That is what the Bearden collage does. That is why the Bearden collage itself is a way of thinking about late 20th century and 21st century art making and poetry making and dance making and music making. Bearden was an artist who lived in community with other artists. If you go to the journal Callaloo, for example, to his wonderful conversation with Albert Murray and Alvin Ailey, his friends, talking amongst each other, talking about the different kinds of art makers they all came up with, talking to each other, making their art in conversation with each other. If we remember Albert Murray naming so many of the Bearden collages, that kind of exchange, I think there's a way that, for me certainly, the example of living a life in the multi-arts was always something that I wanted to live in myself because of the enrichment that you could see that these artists gave to each other. Romare Bearden, as we called him, as his family pronunciation. When I got to graduate school, people said Romare, but Romare was always the name that I heard, was a cousin by marriage to my great uncle Charles Alston, also known as Spinky, who was, which, I mean, I just have to, great Uncle Spinky, one of the great uncle names of all time. And Alston himself was an artist of great renown, and the two were cousins by marriage. So when I was growing up, I did not know Bearden, and most of the relatives on that side of the family were gone by the time that I was 10 years old. But I always knew about him. And again, following on Sarah Lewis's presentation with the presence in our home of a watercolor crucifix from the 1940s that Bearden gave my mother when he was 8 years old and came to Christmas without money for presents, but with pictures rolled up under his arms. What I love about that story, and what I loved about growing up with that very, very serious piece of work, is that Bearden thought that a crucifix was an appropriate gift for an 8-year-old at Christmas. And what I think is very powerful about that, and very powerful about the things that artists understand, is that in fact it was the right gift for my mother. It neither scarred her nor turned her, infinitely more morbid or excessively religious. It was something that she looked at and thought about the lines and thought about the colors and thought about the shapes and made a part of her visual aesthetic all her life. And I think that that's something very powerful about what the artist in the family, if there is one, and if it's not the person who makes art that we get to look at forever and ever, the figure of the artist in the family, the person who remembers their dreams, the person who speaks in their own tongue to a certain extent, the person who dares to do things in the way that they see and others can't always see, that person is a necessary person in families, and for a certain kind of child especially. So I grew up always knowing about him and knowing about this particular painting. And as I said, everyone passed away. And then when I went into college, because mind you, Bearden's work was not something that was taught when I was in school, although I was thrilled to discover much later, and we have photographs of this, that at Yale University in the African American Studies Department where I teach, Bearden was brought by Charles Davis in the 1970s to teach an art history class. And so we have a wonderful picture of him with his wife walking under the High Street gate, and a picture of him diagramming paintings on the blackboard in one of the African American Studies buildings. But that said, it was not anything I learned in school. It was something I learned autodidactically. And then when it came time to write a dissertation, to think about hybrid texts in African American literature, that's what I wanted to write about. It was the Bearden collage that gave me a way to make sense of those books, that gave me a way to make sense of books that were not eager to fit into any genre, that were in some fundamental and energized way collaged. Then I became a poet. Derek Walcott was my teacher, Bearden's great friend. I wrote a small poem about Bearden and showed it to Walcott, shy. Walcott said, well, you know, you must send it to him. And I said, oh no, I couldn't possibly send it to him. And he said, if you can't put your work out in the world where it belongs, then you have no business writing the work. So I sent the work to Bearden. And we had a little correspondence and one long, memorable telephone conversation where I looked him up in the phone book and called him and just started talking, and he talked to me and he told me to read The Art of War, and he told me that artists were like mice who needed to be left alone to do their rustling and rummaging in buildings without people bothering them. It was an extraordinary conversation. And so that felt like grace. So I wanted to just read a couple of poems. There were many ways to go with this because there's so much to say about this great artist, about the greatest artist of the 20th century. I'll say that, and I'll have the argument with anybody, because I do think that is true. Not the greatest Negro artist, not the greatest American artist, but the greatest artist of the 20th century. And so I'm just going to read a few poems which lead us into Bearden. I talked about how much I learned from Bearden as a poet. This is a small section from a longer poem about the Amistad Mutiny, and the blue, the profundity of Bearden's blues, what those blues, the information they carry, the ancestral information they carry, the information they telegraph, his profound understanding of the nuances and cultural resonances of blue is something that informs this poem called Absence. In the absence of women on board, when the ship reached the point where no land mass was visible in any direction and the funk had begun to accrue, human funk, spirit funk, soul funk, who commenced the moaning? Who first hummed that deep sound from empty bowels, roiling stomachs, from back of the frantically thumping heart? In the absence of women, of mothers, who found the note that would soon be called blue? The first blue note, from one bowel, one throat, joined by dark others in gnarled harmony. Before the head rag, the cast iron skillet, new blue awaited on the other shore, invisible as yet unhummed. Who knew what note to hit or how? In the middle of the ocean, in the absence of women, there is no deeper deep, no bluer blue. Bearden. One eye is larger than her two black hands. Sunday hats, brass trumpets, flowered dresses, a woman's holler, river or guitar. Gigantic ham hands, open singing mouths, brown purple mouths, huge hands and wet bean eyes. Those opaque eyes are looking straight at you. Women's haunches, the black backs of skulls. Black spaces sucking in a breath like jazz. Low moons, women taking tin tub baths. Omni Albert Murray. One, overture with an epigraph from Murray. Obviously, there is much to be said for the conscious cultivation and extension of taste, but there is also something to be said for the functional reaction to artistic design and honeysuckles as normal elements of human existence. The ancestors are humming. Write a poem, girl. Turn the volume up, they say. Loud talking, talking loud. On piano, someone plays a boogie-woogie run. Omni Albert Murray, omni, omni Albert Murray. In my mind and in his, I think a painting is a poem. A tambourine's a hip shake and train whistle a guitar. Trains run north-south home, their whistles howling Afro-am. Black and blue, blue, Afro blue, blue, black and blue, blue, blue. I can picture Bearden with his magazines and scissors. I can see guitar shapes, curves like watermelon rinds. Will I find names like True Blood and the shapes for my collage? Omni Albert Murray, Omni Omni Albert Murray. 5, Bearden at work. Epigraph from Bearden. Regardless of how good you might be at whatever else you did, you also had to get with the music. Paper cutting, rhythm, snips of blue foil falling onto watercolored paper colored people into place. Eye divines arrangement, hands slide shifting paper shapes, panes of color learned from stained glass windows, pauses, spacing, rests from Father Hines. Odysseus is blue. He can't get home. In Bearden's planes, collage on board, shellac. Watch Dorothy children enter Oz. Look, Daddy, color. No more white and black. This is the year of the color TV. Odysseus is blue and now is black. New York City at Christmas time. Christmas tree shapes like Bearden in a Bearden blue. Tin stars falling on a yellow paper trumpet. Blue sucked in, blues blown back out. Black folks on ice skates shine like Christmas trees. New York glitters like a new idea. And to conclude, farewell to you. Each man on this slow train has Bearden's Bruegel face. His clean crown, putty smooth, eyes wise, no trace of the colors, shapes behind them, of paper cut to palms, or rump curves, or half moons, or a rooster comb. Through Newark, apple blossoms line train tracks to the church, and broken eyes of windows as these cars lurch past oil drums, blue and yellow like the blues singer's dress, past empty boxcars stacked like tenement windows, or like piano keys awaiting Father Hines. Willie the Lion Smith, sound unwinds, stanzas float in this notebook at angles to the page like the angles of music in a Bearden clef. Nausicaa makes jelly, a green anemone, snake hips unmoored in a blue-black sea. These stanzas on the page, discarded strips from your collage, salvaged like America, Creole montage. Honor the artist's vision of a vast world, black and blue. Beloved Romare Bearden, farewell to you. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm glad you're all alive and healthy and here, and same for me. I am going to have the temerity to speak about and speak for Romare Bearden for a number of reasons. One reason is that my grandfather, John French, was the same color as Bearden. My mother, Betty Weidman, spoke in a fashion that epitomizes the stylistics and the force and the beauty of Bearden's collage. I went to the same high school that Romare Bearden went to in Pittsburgh. And I have a loved one, a brother, whose name is Eugene, was Eugene. That brother's dead. So those are some of the reasons I take up Romare Bearden's voice. No one's fault, Romare Bearden supposes, if a gift doesn't fit in the box it was meant to fill with love. He tilts the collage board, lets fragments arranged so far slide back onto the work table, and discovers they no longer quite fit on the table either. Board empty, table overflowing, he must start again. Attentive as Bearden always is to each individual element he works, not only so it fits into the collage, but also anchors other fragments he picks meticulously, scrupulously, as if his life depends on each choice, listening intently for something resembling music, whose rhythms will guide his hands, eyes, maybe even his feet, shuffling beneath the work table's edge like monks' feet under a piano. It's no surprise Bearden misremembers sometimes the dimensions of a collage board or forgets how large a medley of ingredients he has assembled to glue, nail, sew to a board. Anyone observing him labor could have told him his undertaking an impossible task. Too many things gathered on the table, limited room, after all, within a frame. Bearden's extremely smart, so he must have known better too, but the privilege of paying absolute attention, piece by piece, to every item he selects seduces him. If pushed, he'd probably insist that losing track of the bigger picture also a mercy, even a momentary state of grace, especially when you're an older man, he might go on to say. A snatch of antique patchwork Alabama quilt grasped in his fingers, alive under his gaze, the handling of it, rotating, rubbing the play of light over colored threads, smell of it as he brings it closer to his eyes, the dream of mounting it perfectly are worth risking disappointment, worth starting over if the new gleaning won't exactly settle in among the others, and he must listen more closely, a while longer, for a silent tune that animates and clarifies what must be done next. Every single collected thing, antique of course, but all have endured rupture, transition, the terror of disappearance within an unfamiliar context where individual identity may materialize or not. Or Bearden might say, let me give you a less abstract example of how collage constructed. Start with the bare bones plot of a story. Let's call it Eugene's story. It begins with me and two other colored boys beating up on a crippled white boy. My grandma intervenes. The crippled boy's name is Eugene, and he becomes my friend. He keeps pigeons in the tiny attic room where he lives with his mother above a brothel. Through a hole in the floorboards, Eugene shows me what goes on below. He draws that action and teaches me to draw it. Grandma discovers our drawings and destroys them, scares and shames us into admitting their source. She goes with Eugene to the source and speaks to his mother, returns with Eugene to our house, and Eugene lives with us for a short year, then dies. Collage is layer upon layer of questions about this simple story. One luxury of growing old, Bearden continues, is more time to ask questions about simple stories we make up, stories that make us up. For instance, will I be born again, live again, once this particular allotment of time runs out? Is a city called Pittsburgh still reachable by catching a train north from Mecklenburg, North Carolina, or a train west from Harlem that climbs over and tunnels through many mountains, rounds a gigantic horseshoe-shaped curve? If Pittsburgh continues to exist, clinging to steep hills like Rome, cordoned by bridges and 3 rivers, and if I reach Pittsburgh and walk its streets, am I a boy there, or old like I am here and now, still asking a boy's questions? What names did Eugene give his birds? How much did Eugene's mom charge for a piece of pussy? Did she earn more or less in a year than the price of one of my collages commands today? Is teasing my bald head with idle questions a less forgivable luxury now than when I was a kid? If I return to the Pittsburgh I'm remembering, would I carry knowledge allowing me to pose questions a boy couldn't ask because he had no idea of what he yearned to know? A boy with meager experience, few words, just yearned to name his yearnings, his few ideas beyond yearning to enable him to decide exactly what he desires to ask. No one to whom he could address his most nagging questions, even if he'd been able to articulate them. Man and boy, hemmed in by circumstance, time, whether innocent of time or intimidated by evidence of time's imminent expiration. Doomed either way, then or now, stuck with a habit of spending, perhaps wasting precious time, daydreaming, as if living and questioning never end, as if childish questions might stump time, buy time, stop time, long enough for a boy, a man, to slip past the conductor and ride back and forth to Pittsburgh on a beam of light without paying the price of a ticket. Anyway, Bearden confides, my first drawings weren't very nice. I learned from my friend Eugene how to draw the nasty stuff we spied on through the rotting floor of the room he shared with his mother over a whorehouse down Spring Street and around the corner from my grandmother's boarding house. One day, Grandma saw us extremely busy drawing on big spotted sheets of paper. Meat came wrapped in from the butcher shop, and she marched over. What you boys up to? Why you all so quiet over here? And when she saw what we were up to, her eyes got wide, and she hollered, snatched our drawings, ripped them up, and rained tiny pieces in the kitchen garbage pail. I expected a good whack or two. My grandmother, one of those large-bosomed women who loved children dearly, especially me, but when you made her mad, watch out, pal. Trouble was, Grandma so nice and easy most of the time, you didn't notice her getting mad. First sign of mad, pow. Then it's too late to move out her way, because with Grandma, getting mad also a matter of getting even. Fact is, I didn't exactly understand why she might be hitting mad when I saw her coming over to where we were busy at the kitchen table, though I sort of knew the pictures Eugene and I were drawing had something very secret, very private about them. I surely didn't want Grandma, of all people in the world, to see. What I had peeked at between the raggedy floorboards scared me. People hurting one another, my first thought. Noisy, ugly thrashing about, mean grabbing, mean pushing and squeezing, spilled whiskey, dirty sheets, cigarettes, bare skin of grown-up body parts showing I'd never seen before. More scary, because it was colored bodies and white bodies down there mixed up closer than I ever saw colored and white mixing on Spring Street, and the little checkerboard briar patches of neighborhood around Spring, and the rolling mill where a few lucky folks had regular jobs. All kinds of people living in the row houses around there. Poor, the one requirement. Mixing on one hand, but on the other hand, definitely not mixing. Only colored men rented my grandmother's rooms, and different houses, different blocks, different churches for white and colored, because people believed in sticking to their own kind. Even kids believed it. So the first time I met up with Eugene, it was me, Mumps, and Bo, the three of us teasing him, beating on him unmercifully, because what the hell a white boy think he doing, standing there, staring, ugly as a fresh knot on somebody's head, just got conked by a rock. Probably him being crippled as much as being the wrong color, though Eugene's color was my color too, by the way, made us jump him, smack him down so he'd go away and never bring his pitiful self back to the alley behind Spring where we played. My grandmother busted in that time too, in the alley, setting down her shopping bags on the cobblestones, yelling, "Stop it! Stop that, you bad boys!" and whacking whoever she could get her hands on, running us away from that skinny little white kid, whacking Mumps and Bo like she whapped me, because that was how it worked back then around Spring Street. You were everybody your color's child. And if you got caught doing wrong by any adult your color, they had the right to whip your behind and send you home for another good beating, because you should know better and not shame yourself, shame your people by doing wrong in public as if you hadn't been raised better. Anyway, going back to the other time, later, after she tore up those butcher paper drawings and shredded them, or maybe burned them to ashes in the kitchen sink, Grandma calmed down and asked me and Eugene, what in Jesus' name did we think we were doing? And where'd we get the idea of those terrible drawings? We told her about the room under the attic room Eugene shared with his mama, and holes in one corner of the floor covered over with just a ratty piece of linoleum we lifted to spy on the goings-on below. Told her which particular house around the corner from Grandma's house it was I went to almost every day after school, and most evenings too, if Grandma said okay, to visit Eugene after we'd become best friends. My, oh my, good Lord have mercy, Grandma groaned, and took Eugene by the hand after she let go the ear she was pinching, and him gimping off beside her. And I know Eugene didn't hardly want to go home, but he knew he better go, and did, dragging his bad leg to slow things down as much as he dared, without letting on he was scared or stubborn or just plain didn't want to go. But off he went with Grandma, and when she come back to our house, I sure was surprised to see she still got Eugene by the hand. And he got a little plaid cardboard suitcase, and Grandma carrying his bird cages, and Eugene stayed with us till he got sick and passed. 1927, when Eugene buried, Bearden says. And in 1978, I tried to pack all that Eugene story and Homewood, East Liberty, Pittsburgh story, the whole damn known world, and probably the unknown too, Bearden smiles, in a 16 1/4 inch by 20 1/2 inch collage pasted on board I titled Farewell, Eugene. All those worlds as they appeared to me nearly 50 years afterwards in my memories of how crowded a moment, a city, a boy's universe can be every single second if you teach yourself to look closely and refine patiently for a lifetime the skills of cutting, painting, gluing down textures, fabrics, colors, layer after layer to picture what the past might have been and how it rises again, solid and present as the bright orange disk of sun I put at the top right corner of Farewell, Eugene. The sun shining almost red over Eugene's funeral one day 50 years ago, with everybody on earth in attendance, or at least nobody missing who should be there. Eugene's friends, his people, mine, his pigeons, Grandma, me, we're all there in the collage, in the crowd back then, and this time too, if I got it close to right. All of us remembered revived beneath an orange sun, coloring the city, coloring flowers Eugene's mother holds. Same old sun, same old Pittsburgh, same old simple questions asking to be asked. The whole crowd, all of us then and now, living and dead, saying our goodbyes, our hellos to Eugene. As many of us, you could say, as in the number religious thinkers in the Middle Ages used to bicker over if someone asked them how many angels fit on the point of a pin. Thank you.
Good evening. Who can say the measure of a life, its impact, when its owner's reach lives beyond the beyond in the countless images of his creation? Bearden knew me before I knew him. His work looked out upon me in the framed art of my childhood home. His artistry hung in the hallowed corridors of the universities and libraries that I visited. Before I became an adult, Bearden had made the world a kinder, gentler place for my visage. Not just in my own blackness or brownness, but also in my urbanness. As a child coming of age in the 1980s, Bearden's collages of urbanity, of regular folk living on the top of one another, moving to the syncopated rhythms of subway cars, or in Chicago, where I grew up, the L, clacking against the track, or moving to the sing-song of mothers calling from their windows to a child, "Get in the house before I have to come get you." His work long ago looked out on me and for me as a child of the city before I knew he was there. Our first encounter, or really the first time that I met him, that I came to know he was there, when I welcomed him into my consciousness, I was a young 20-something, playing grown-up for the first time. I still am, so I'd like to think. The night's top billing was a fundraiser at an art gallery in Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia. I distinctly remember it because I was worried that I would be out of place, too young, too unaware, too unsure of where I fit in such a stuffy place. But there was Bearden waiting for me. My partner Stephanie and I, after hearing the fundraising pitch, decided we'd play our roles to the final act, which meant, of course, buying a piece of art. We bought a framed commemorative poster of the lamp, the image of two beautiful young women, earnest, self-possessed, focused on the future beneath a quiet lamp, spoke to us in the audacity of their blackness. The poster was commissioned by the NAACP in 1984 to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision. But it was 1996. It was a moment for many X's, of public enemies, of sounds and beats of blackness that shaped the fortunes and the attitudes of a hip-hop generation. We were the children of the movement, and the poster spoke more powerfully to us than anything else we laid eyes on that night. Bearden came home with us that night. He came with me into adulthood. It was no longer my parents' works that hung on the wall. He prepared me, as did those young women reading a book for my future. The poster hung in my children's room all their lives until the day I stood in the Schomburg as its incoming director, welcoming so many to see a centennial celebration of Bearden's work, one of our greatest collections. He was there for me when I came into the fullness of the light that he had led for me. The lamp guided me to the moment when I could then take care of Bearden, when I could make sure that new generations of young people would meet him just as he met me, even when they didn't even know it. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Kim Bridgford, the director of the Westchester University Poetry Center and the Westchester University Poetry Conference. Grandeur and kindness define our conference philosophy, and it is the philosophy of Romare Bearden and Russell Goings as well. It is a pleasure to be here celebrating these two giants, and I thank our collaborative partners, the 92nd Street Y, the Bearden Foundation, and the Schomburg Center for joining hands in this endeavor. When Russ and I first had this idea, we could only imagine it would turn out like this. It is my honor to introduce Russ Goings, a longtime friend of Romare Bearden and my longtime friend. At this point in my life, after nearly 20 years, it is impossible for me to imagine my life without the poetic lyricism of his remarks, his optimism, and his belief in excellence. There is no other person I know who each time he enters a room leaves it changed. When we were on NPR in Charlotte last spring, people were so surprised by what he was saying on live radio that they couldn't drive and listen at the same time. They had to pull off the road. As Russ always says to me about moments, you don't get them back, and so you make them real. It wouldn't surprise you to know that Russ has never met a stranger. I was his teacher at Fairfield University for 13 years and worked with him on The Children of Children Keep Coming, an epic poem about the African American experience. During that period, he sent me so many manuscripts they would not fit in my mailbox. However, it is his belief that if you are going to do something, you do it with your whole heart. And that shining belief ultimately took his book to Simon & Schuster, to NPR, and to the stage. He also received an honorary degree from Fairfield University, which I had the good fortune to present to him. Russ teases me about the understatement used by people who grew up in Coal Valley, Illinois, the town I'm from. Like Mark Twain, we might say that we had gotten a little wet if we had gotten absolutely drenched. He always says with a laugh that people have a different way of talking on 125th Street. However, my Coal Valley understatement fails when talking about the contours of his life. He was born in poverty, became a professional football player, was the first African American to hold a seat on the New York Stock Exchange, and the first chairman of the Studio Museum of Harlem. He founded Essence. He was, as I've mentioned, the close friend of Romare Bearden. That friendship changed those two men forever. Now, as I look back on my friendship with Russ, I see the arc of definition, his being the caretaker of this work, and now his moving to another phase, offering his experience and work to the world. It is so easy to think small. Russ Goings does not take us to task for that, but when he enters a room, sees the shining excellence in all of us, has a fundamental belief that excellence should always have a seat at the table. Then, if it is a moment like this one, he would remind us all to cherish where Romare Bearden has brought us. I give you Russell Goings.
Thank you and good evening. There's so much I want to say. I need to thank Bob Gilson, Bernard Schwartz, Lisa Gilson, Larissa Gilson. I need to thank a whole host of people to make this moment possible. I want to talk to you about generosity. But before I get there, you saw the image of the lamp. You might know that that is Susan Taylor and her daughter. Hello? For you all that don't know Susan Taylor was the editor of Essence magazine. She was the person, okay? That was Susan Taylor and her daughter. I had some prepared remarks, but I want to deal with you on another kind of level that deals with the improvisation of survival. I want to talk about generosity. Dr. Bridgford is generous to a fault. I studied with her, and it's going on now for 20 years, trying to learn what a comma says to a semicolon, and a semicolon says to a period, and a period says to a paren, or an enjambment says to something, or a sonnet says to a villanelle, or a tercerima. I mean, I went back to school at 60 years old, 62. I stayed in so long, and she mentioned to you that they decided that they would give me an honorary degree and not to come back anymore, right? But she's generous. And she's from Coal Valley. They don't talk straight. They talk in indirections, you know. Man, you're wet. I mean, you know, she talked about the rain and stuff like that. But she's generous to a fault. I want to talk about her generosity and why we are here tonight. Kim Bridgford once said to me, you know, it would be nice if we put together a coalition about a gathering of the Schomburg, a gathering of the 92nd Street Y, the Bearden Foundation, and to get together and have this moment. This comes from Ken, and she said, wouldn't it be nice? So you all are nice. Mm-hmm. And we went and made some presentations, and here we have it today. So that's fine. That's why we're here. That's why Kim Bridgford is here. That's why we're building bridges. That's why we're opening doors. That's why we know we've been down, going around. We're on 92nd Street. Why? Because we share in the diaspora. Bearden talked about it. There were things that he talked about, but I want to share with you some intimate thoughts of Bearden, so it's unprepared. Here we are, two black guys walking down the street with paper dolls. Bearden's got paper dolls, cutouts in a bag. I would say to Bearden, suppose we get caught with this shit. How are we going to explain that you're a collagist and that we got these nude women and paper? They know there's something wrong, right? There had to be something wrong. Bearden, you speak better than I do, so you tell them about it, okay? So this is part of Bearden. So I'm going to tell you a few secrets about Bearden. By the way, the last person that he spoke to, it was me. I took him to the hospital on January 30th, 1988. I was undressing him and he fell over and he never recovered. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the man you call Romare Bearden. He worked up to the very end. I became his caretaker. I became the back that carried him up the 3 or 4 flights of stairs, that put him in the tub, that rubbed him down, that did his things, right? And I became the person that carried out his list that he would give me every day. So let me tell you what a day's list would look like. For his tude, we call it attitude, I would get him in the morning some pot liquor. Do you all know what pot liquor is? It is the juice of collard greens. Y'all don't think that's funny? Y'all want to know how black he was? He wanted collard greens. The juice of collard greens in the morning. In the afternoon, I would get him some cornbread so that he could sop. Y'all don't know what I'm talking about. But I'm going to tell you about it. Y'all need to, you need to know this. I would get him the various essentials of life for him. At times I would go get him Nova Scotia from Barney Green grass, right? A little bagels and cream cheese. I am the person that became, in a way, the extension of Bearden. I talk about his generosity. His generosity ended up that he made me the caretaker of a body of art. It's his first collages and his very last work, which I think you see up here, signed to Rush, December 1987, and an arc of work that you begin to see in the gallery. I want to share some notions to you about Bearden and his notion about the universality of art and the universality that we have had discussions about mankind, humankind, and the notion of art. Art belongs, which he said, to no one. It comes from deep from within. He provided the kinds of notion that allowed the notion of Jim Crow's to be seduced by Charlie Yardbird Parker's birds to drink sweet water from Ida B. Wells' wells at Birdland. We've had that kinds of discussions. For you all who don't know Ida B. Wells, she was a female fighter, Tulsa, Oklahoma, journalist who fought the Crows. Bearden and I, we would talk not about black and white, but we would talk about crows. We would talk about behavior. We would talk about that which Sap had a conversation about. Sap is Socrates, Aristotle, and Plato. Can you imagine that? Two old guys, black guys, sitting down talking about. Can you get that? We're talking about, Bearden wanted to talk about existentialism and Godot. I'm losing it. I'm trying to share with you the notion of Bearden and his greatness. Well, tonight I wanted to talk to you about if Bearden is the quintessential artist of this century or the 21st century, then he should be, and I'm calling for this, he should have a room in the Museum of Modern Art. He should not be on the wall. He should not be on some corner. He should be very much a part of what's happening at the Museum of Modern Art. He should be afforded the same kind of grandeur and reception in the world, since he has the Medal of Honor from the president in terms of art, right? He's got that. But if you go to the major museums and you say, well, what do you have of Bearden? They might have one piece. They might have two pieces. But he's considered part of the national treasury. If he's part of the national treasury and you go to any other place, they would have him in some place. He should have a room. We should make sure that his oeuvre is part of something that becomes a part of the consciousness of those who call themselves or work as artists. Bearden should have that. But if we look at where he is and how he shows up and these citadels, then we call it parsimony, we call it lack of, we call it something else. But as his caretaker of this substantial body of art, I had to think about how do we get to an audience. So if you haven't seen, you saw this body of work out there, the Odyssey, and you see the historical figures. Will you tell me, is there a conversation going on out there? Hello? Is there? No, seriously, y'all going to let me stand up here and bomb, or you're going to, it's kind of, You don't want me to talk to you with my teeth out, do you? Huh? I mean, I can do that. There's a conversation that's going on up there. There's a subliminal conversation. There's a topical conversation. There's a conversation that's going on there. This historic moment also says that our Jewish brothers and sisters who suffered the diaspora, who suffered the notion of genocide, who suffered the kinds of things, there is a conversation going on. We got the Odyssey in there, and we got the historical figures there, and we are housed in this citadel. Isn't there a conversation about humanity and art going on there? There's not a singular conversation going on here. There's something wrong if y'all don't get that conversation. There is something wrong. There's something wrong that says that if we as black folks are talking about art, that we have half of Jacob Lawrence's migration at the Museum of Modern Art, and we got half of them at the Phillips Collection. Is that right? Hello? Hello, how do we fill this notion of man's humanity? Then we have out here the Odysseus by Homer and by Bearden. Then we have this host of African-American historical figures that open the door a bit wider. We have that. Somewhere along the line, we're supposed to have some kind of unity, shouldn't we? Or am I missing the point? Am I really missing the point? No? So how can we sit here and somebody talks about, well, free the land? Well, free the land and Vollard, if I understood it, have a conversation. They had a real conversation. They had a conversation say that Picasso went down to the foot of Madrid and looked over and he saw some shit, so he said, I'm going to claim these lines. Hello? He's going to claim these lines. He claimed the lines in space. But if you look at what we have there in terms of the historical figures, is there a sweeter line than Romare Bearden's line on felt-tip pen, with felt-tip paper on porous felt-tip pen on porous paper? Is there any truer notion of this? Is there a conversation that's going on with the universality? The universality of grief and sadness comes out in the blues, it comes out in the jazz, it comes out in the song, Lord, I've been down, 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 going around, don't know where. Lord, is this higher ground, or take me to higher ground? Does it come out in that way? Does it come out in the music of our people that says that you see setting out there somebody named Tell It from Shouted Out, Tennessee? I talked to Bearden because before he died, he gave me this portfolio. He gave me this portfolio of images with the notion that you'll know what to do with it, and sometime you'll find something to do with it, right? I found what to do with it October 16th, 1995. What happened October 16th, 1995? Do you all have any idea? Do you have any idea what happened to us as a people October 16th, 1859? Check the two digits, change them around. October 16, 1859 was that John Brown took Harper's Ferry. Hello? October 16, 1995, 1 million black men gathered at the mall. Hello? At the mall in Washington, D.C. I take the train down. Bearden had given me this portfolio sometime before he died, about 85 or something. He told me that he'll know something to do with it. He also said to me when he laid the Odyssey, well, there is a conversation that goes on with it, but I didn't know the conversation until I put it up here, enjoying the historical figures with the Odyssey and with the clickety-clack, clack, clack that went with the train. and with the million black men that gathered at the mall in Washington, D.C. Historical, right? Clean, right there, says the whole thing. It joins the pantheon of artists that have gone on before. So I am the caretaker, and I want you to tell me, what do I do with it? What do I do with it? I share it? Yes, I do. How do I share it? You want to help me share it? Then the gauntlet has been put forth. He needs to be in a room in a major institution. I can't see how you can talk to me about the Museum of Modern Art and you don't have the giant. You got one or two pieces. That's a shame. Huh? This in our country, that's a shame. I'm a caretaker. So help me to caretake it. Help me to join both the notion of the migration with the Odyssey, with the historical figures. My conversations with Bearden was at times, so what was Rosa Parks thinking about in jail? How did Rosa Parks get to be in jail? You see Rosa Parks in jail out there? Do you have any notion how Rosa Parks got to be in jail when she sat there? She sat there and she heard the man come up to her and say, lady, you better move. And she said, I can't move. I can't move. I'm going to sit right here. I'm going to sit right here until I die. Why did she say that? What she heard was the whisper of ancestors, and Bearden would laugh about it, coming over the plains that said, don't move. You're setting on a moment of history. Don't move. In that notion, you find in this depiction of Rosa Parks in jail a blockiness. Is that right? You find the straight back, you find an attitude, you find the whole thing. Two, that's one. The other thing that he would talk about with the Odyssey is that the Odyssey has its own propaganda. The leaf motif colors in the Odyssey are red, green, and black. Those are the colors of the African American flag. Hello? Those are the colors of a lot of stuff. So I've taken and I've rambled across this, but I want to tell you that my wife and I are the caretakers of 800 or more of Beardens. You hear me? Major images. All we're looking for is a home. So I ask you for your help. And I ask you to know that the conversation with Bearden just becomes one of the children who keep coming, who keep singing, who keep knowing that the next moment in asking the question, is this the day? Is this the day? Yes. Is this the day? Is this the day we're going to ring the bell? Is this the day that we are going to mend the crack in the Liberty Bell? Is this the day? Is this the day to sing the song that goes with the clickety-clack, clack, clack of justice and equality? Or are we going to sing the song that Tullet sings and the children are children that when Martin Luther King at the Lorraine Hotel, I think there's a word called prescient. He was prescient. He asked, I've been to the mountaintop, he made the statement, I've looked over, who is going to sing the song and close the day over my open grave? There came this notion, there came this clack, the crack, the shot, the notion, no, not another, not a brother, not another, not another brother, not a lover, not another. Good God Almighty, another done gone, done gone. Who sings the song? Done gone. Over his open grave, tell it. From Shouted Out, Tennessee, sings my country 'tis of thee. Sweet, sweet land of liberty, this land of unity, this country of beginning equality. Another star has fallen for you and me in this country of liberty. Another star has fallen over amber waves of grain. Another star has fallen. Martin has fallen. Another star has fallen. Having said that, then we want to rise the notion of Bearden to another level. Not only is he in the canon, but I am hearing, since I came out with that they covered the notion that I'm going to have to do something with this body of work, I am hearing from major entities from around the country and in the world that they would like to entertain the notion of a substantial portion of Bearden's oeuvre. And I say to you that I don't own it, I'm only a caretaker, and that he should be seen. The generosity that he showed with me is the generosity that I must pass on. You hear me? I must pass on. I don't know about a contribution to sir, because I'm poor and don't have any teeth. So that's one. Two, I'm not going to do what they generally talk about giving back. I'm not about to do that. But what I am about to do is attempt to enrich the moment. To enrich the moment. To enrich the moment. To enrich the notion that Bearden should be in the embassies across the country. Bearden should be in the White House. The historical figures should find some place. We should have that, right? You hear? So I'm saying to you that it is bigger. This is historic. There is a generosity goes with this setting this evening. But what is to happen the next day and the next day and the next day? If the line that we see out there on those simple drawings that look like that carry the notion of art, and that no one can, and that you hear from time to time, well, you know, he's a black artist, I say that's bullshit. He's an artist. Either his lines sing or don't sing. So on that notion, I shall leave you with this thought in mind that Bearden said to me, he said, Russ, how did you become a football player? And I told him it's because I was a singer. And he was dying and he needed a laugh. And he said, you were a singer? I said, the singing got you to football? And I said, yes. And he said, well, tell me. And I said, well, in the Baptist church, everybody sang. And the kids of the church had to play poor fiddles or something. And my notion came that day, and my day was to sing the song. And the song I was supposed to sing was Joyce Kilmer's Trees. I think I shall never see a poem as lovely as a tree. And I was supposed to end this kind of recital with lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Well, this is the Black Anthem, right? I sang Joyce Kilmer's Trees. My mother was sitting just about there. She ran up across. She didn't want me to play football, but she had an agreement with my father. She ran across the stage, hugged me, and whispered in my ear, play football, son, play football. the minister rose up, only like a black minister could, said, "There is a great football player in the house." I tried to sing, lift every voice and sing, but my mother said, no, don't do that anymore, Junior. You've hit notes that have never been hit before. Well, this was kind of Bearden's last laugh. It was a moment for laughter. I leave you with the notion that you have had a major reprieve. I am not going to sing, and I thank you all.